The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
The good news for many is Ontario is opening up again. The bad news is COVID-19 is still with us and even resurging. Tonight, what Wastewater can tell us about this apparent sixth wave of the pandemic. Then, remember slackers, selling out, and grunge? J.N. Jagannathan talks to writer Chuck Klosterman about his new book on the pop culture and politics of the 90s. It's Tuesday, April 5th, and that's next on The Agenda. Two years ago, the idea that we'd be studying what gets flushed down Ontario toilets for signs of disease would have been met with blank stares for most people. But here we are. With us now for a closer look at what those indicators are currently showing, and we'll introduce our guests, as is our custom, from furthest away to closest to our studio, starting in Sudbury, Ontario, with Gustavo Ibazeta, bioinformatics and genomics researcher at the Health Sciences North Research Institute and an adjunct professor at Laurentian University. In the Alta Vista area of the nation's capital, Robert De La Tolla, professor of environmental engineering at the University of Ottawa and research advisor with the COVID-19 Wastewater Coalition. And in the west end of the provincial capital, Claire J. Oswald, associate professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies at Ryerson University and the academic director of the Urban Water Research Centre. Great to have all of you aboard for our discussion tonight. And just in the interests of full disclosure, I guess I should mention that my wife is a board member of Health Sciences North, which is distinct from, but has a relationship with, the Health Sciences North Research Institute, of which Gustavo is a member. So we put that on the record in the interest of transparency for everybody to know. And with that, let's get to this. Robert, start us off. What does it mean to track COVID-19 through wastewater?
Well, Steve, so the virus of those individuals that are infected can be shed. So that could be shed through saliva, through sputum, fecally shed. So it ends up into the premise piping of our households. So it ends up into those pipes. Those pipes flow into the wastewater infrastructure of a city. So those underground sewers, so everything we don't really see or pay attention to. And we have these underground sewer networks that flow all of that wastewater traditionally to a wastewater treatment plant. And what we're able to do is, since this virus has been shed, we're able to go to that wastewater, collect the sample, and test that sample for the genetic material of the virus. And by doing that, we can measure the concentration. And we could track whether the virus is going up, or that concentration is going up, that concentration is plateauing, or that concentration is going down.
Claire, I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but I think we have to in order to understand how this works. So, okay, it ends up at our water treatment facilities, all that stuff. How does it end up in a lab then for you folks to study?
Yeah, so the samples that we get from the wastewater treatment plants, most of those plants have to do compliance sampling anyway, so they're collecting samples daily. And so we can piggyback on that compliance sampling, and the municipality will provide us with samples. We also have sites, like Dr. De La Tolla said, that are up in the sewer network itself. And we go out and we collect those samples. So we have pumps up at the surface, and we suck sewage out of the sewers, put it in bottles, put it on ice. We take it back to the lab where the analysis occurs.
Well, okay, I think you may have just touched on what I wanted to follow up with, but you're talking little tiny test tubes of samples? You're talking massive tanks of samples, or what are we talking here?
Yeah, usually we're collecting anywhere from 1 to maybe 3 liters of sewage. So it's quite a bit of sewage that ends up coming back to the lab. And we don't use all of it for the analysis. A lot of people use just the solid material that's in the sample.
Okay, Gustavo, again, another sort of icky question here, but how does COVID-19 end up in our feces?
Well, we have receptors, specific receptors that they are distributed in our body, but they are particularly accumulating in our digestive tract. And the virus, they use these receptors to get inside of our body. And once they are in our intestinal tract, they produce the infection of the cells. The process of dying the cells, they produce diarrhea, they produce all kind gastrointestinal problems. And when they think is delivered to our wastewater, we end up collecting that. And the virus goes with all these secretions, the secretion.
This is another reminder that this is a very messy business, right?
Yes.
Yes, it is. All right, Claire, when people say, and you hear this from time to time, wastewater signals are up. I sometimes hear that on the radio. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm. Right. So, we have all of these labs, a lot of which are university labs across the province, who are generating data on the levels of SARS-CoV-2 genetic material that's in the wastewater. All of that data gets reported to the province, to public health units, to facility managers, so they can make decisions. If the data is of a sufficient frequency, so maybe, samples collected 3 to 7 days per week, then you can actually use that for a trend analysis. And the province is doing that. Many public health units are doing that. And what that means is they're looking for sudden changes in the level of genetic material that they are finding in the wastewater. And if they see a sudden change, then the subsequent data, they can look to see if it's trending upwards, downwards, or if it's kind of flat. And if we see more than a 10% increase in the level per day, then we say that that's an increasing trend, and that's what we mean by the signal is up.
Well, let's do a real-life example of this right now. And Robert, we're going to put a chart up here, and for those people who are listening to us on a podcast and can't see this chart, which basically looks like a tidal wave, maybe you could take us through the COVID-19 wastewater signals in Ontario, what these lines mean, what the dotted line at the end mean. Just take us through it, if you would, and explain what we're looking at.
Sure, Steve. So what we're seeing on the chart is you have two axes. So the vertical axis on the left-hand side is this concentration of that genetic material that we've been seeing. So just like Claire was saying, as it goes up or it goes down, and we could see the shape of that curve. And on the horizontal axis is time. And so watching this longitudinally across time, you see this huge wave, in December and January, coming down at the end of February and March. And now this is the concerning part, is you see that wave seem to be starting again. So you see this uptick, this increase in concentration, again, measuring that genetic material within the wastewater. And that wave is going upwards in a direction that's telling us, well, that isn't really good news for the province. It means that there is more material within our wastewaters. And if you look at that graph, there's also 6 regional graphs, Steve, that you could divide that graph into. So that graph's for the whole province. You could take that and you could find the 6 regional graphs on the Science Table website, the Ontario Science Table website. And you'll see that when you look at the 6 regions, so northern, eastern, GTA regions, you will see in all of the regions, unfortunately, it repeats that trend of this upward trend of the signal of COVID-19 in wastewater at the moment.
Well, we have a guy from Northern Ontario here, so let's do that. Gustavo, we don't have a graph of Northern Ontario. We can do better. We have you. So you tell us, what does your graph look like in Northern Ontario right now?
Well, our graph in the Science Table looks exactly the same, going up at this moment. I'm sampling a total of 6 places here in Northern Ontario. Of these 6 places, 3, they are definitely going up. 2, they are stable but up. They were stable where they were before, but that was considered up or high, sorry. And 1 that is Musoni, that is the farther that we are sampling at this moment, that they are relatively low. I think in average, we can say that all these groups, it will be the representation that we see in these graphics that basically going up.
So the wastewater that you're noticing right now, the amount of SARS-CoV-2 in the wastewater is a bit like the canary in the coal mine. You can anticipate that things are going to get worse. Is that right?
Yes. Basically indicated, that we will have more probably hospitalizations in the next few days. We'll see how our population react to this level of virus that is we'll find it in the wastewater.
Now, Northern Ontario, of course, Gustavo, is huge. You happen to be in Sudbury, but would the situation in Sudbury be the same as, for example, Timmins or Thunder Bay, which are, of course, very far apart, but all part of the north.
Yeah, it's something very interesting at this moment is that before I was saying that we are behind 2 to 3 weeks of what's happening in the south. Now we're having exactly the same curve that we have, like you show it, exactly the same curve that is for everybody, and exactly the same curve that we can observe in the GTA, just as an increase. In the case of Susan Marie or North Bay, we're sharing more and more the same kind of signature. And the area of Porcupine, it's always a little bit, few days behind, but now we start to behaving more or less like everybody. I think we are having more transient population moving possibly between one place to other. And without restrictions, that's more feasible to have transmission.
Very interesting. All right, Claire, if I were to ask you what your map in the Greater Toronto Area looks like compared to the map of the entire province that we just saw, the graph rather, what would we see in the Toronto graph?
Right, so the Ontario Science Table does have a chart for the GTA, and so this includes the City of Toronto, but also municipalities around the outskirts of Toronto. And if you compare that to the other regions, I think some of the other regions, like out east, where Dr. Delatola is, that sudden change to an increasing trend happened a little bit before we saw it for the GTA, but now the GTA is also upticking. I will say, though, that in the City of Toronto, it wasn't until mid last week that we saw the viral levels start to go up in wastewater. The 4 plants that are being monitored in the City of Toronto proper, they actually had sort of a low, steady signal, but I think they're starting to head upwards as of last week. Okay,
Robert, you're in Eastern Ontario. What would your graph look like there?
Yeah, the graph over here in Eastern Ontario is going up sharply. So it's been going up at a high rate, the same kind of rate that we saw when we had the initial Omicron wave between, December and January. And it's been steadily going up every day, unfortunately. So the region is not looking the best. There might be some good news. We have some latest data points in some of the areas here in Eastern Ontario that are showing that we might be plateauing or cresting, but there's only a couple of points, but there's been a steep rise here for about 2 weeks.
All right, let me ask our director, Sheldon Osmond, to bring the graph up again. This is the province-wide graph, and I want to draw everybody's attention to the right end of the graph, so right after where March becomes April, and we see the dotted line, the broken line, starting to go up towards the heavens again. Robert, my question is, how do we know that people armed with the information that we seem to be having to deal with another outbreak don't suddenly, start wearing masks a lot more, start being a lot more careful about things, and rather than having that line just continue up, maybe it flattens and starts to go down? How do we know that?
Well, that's the hope, Steve. Like that, that's, I think, and what's interesting is you're bringing up a really great point. So as we've been watching wastewater signal throughout the last 2 years, and whether restrictions are being announced that they're going to be applied or eased within different communities, we've observed that even prior to the date where the mandate was either removed or applied, you've seen the trend in wastewater respond. And I think it's exactly what you're talking about. There's a human response and a human behavior. You start hearing about the mandates, you start hearing about what's to come, and people respond early. So I think that's one of the benefits of wastewater data at this point, is that it's being seen by people around the province. And as an educational tool, we can make those decisions. So looking at this graph, personally, I see this graph all the time, so I wear my mask. Other people who see it might make other sort of inferences or decisions, but definitely there's a response to seeing the data in real time. And we hope that response, as you said, in this case, might lead to a plateau as opposed to that dotted line going up.
So will you be able to say definitively now that we are in a 6th wave of COVID-19 as we speak?
Well, if you look at the wastewater data, which we've looked at, it's definitely pointing to that. If you look at the percent positivity around the province, you're in the high teens. So that's pointing to it. If you look at the reproduction, the effective reproduction number around the province and around the PHUs, they're above. Many of the PHUs are above 1. Across the province, we're above 1. All of these numbers, plus that slow uptick we're starting to see in hospitalizations, I think are indicative of a 6th wave.
Okay, PHUs, public health units. Just we're an acronym-free zone here. All right, let's move on. Gustavo, can wastewater signals, let me set up this question this way. We know that with testing being the way it is today, it's not as, say, comprehensive as it once was during the course of the past 2 years. And as a result, when the province every day puts out a number saying, here's how many positive test cases we had, it's not as useful a number as it used to be because there's just so much less testing going on. Question, can wastewater signals tell us how many cases exist in one region in a way that testing, with PCRs or antigens can't tell us anymore?
Well, people, they are working very hard to produce models that will give us precisely that number. Peter Juni was one of the researchers that was working, and still many people that they are working very hard to produce models that will produce those numbers. I think we are in early stages to have results in this direction, but I think we can say that eventually we will arrive and have something that is validated, and we will have this possible correlation.
Any idea when that might be able to happen?
I'm not working directly with that, but I think we are very close. We have already some results that we are very positive, but it's still in the process of validation of all these models.
All right, Claire, we live in a huge province. And obviously, if you just check the wastewater in Toronto, that's not going to tell you anything about Eastern or Southwestern or Central or Northern Ontario. So my question for you is, how many different water systems do you have to get samples from in order to have a good sense about what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, we only have information for the areas that are being sampled. So mainly those are areas that are on a sewer network and are draining to a wastewater treatment plant. So areas where people are on septic systems, if it's not being sampled, we don't have data for those areas. There are also some communities that make use of sewage lagoons. So it's only if those are being sampled.
So there would be
we're going to get information.
Right. So there's presumably big chunks of rural Ontario where we just don't know anything right now.
Yeah, right now, through the provincial initiative, there are about 170 locations being sampled. And that's, I think, just over 75% of the population of the province that is being sampled through this initiative.
Okay, well, that's not bad. But having said that, Gustavo, can you draw some inferences, or can you make some useful speculation about those who are on septic systems and therefore not caught by this testing about the prevalence of COVID-19 in their lives?
Well, one thing that we need to pay attention is that the people, they are not living in only one place inside of the city. They are moving inside of the city, and they can go to another places where maybe they are connected with our systems. We have a high number of people that they have septic tanks, and those people, they are not being evaluated, of course. But if these people go to places where they work and they can have access to facilities there, we'll be able to work. I think in all the sites that we have, we probably cover between 30 to 40, in some cases even 50% of the total population. And for our data that we have at this moment, comparing with the samples, with the clinical samples that were making sense before they were overwhelmed by Omicron, we were following very close. So we have confidence that we can have a close number that will reflect what is happening in the society.
Gotcha. Robert, let me ask you again about those PHUs, those public health units that you just referenced, and that is, how forthcoming with data have they been, or do they tend to be, in order to let you folks do the work that you do?
Yeah, so, this program started officially in January 15, 2021. So we've been doing this for quite a bit of time, and those of us have started quite a ways before that, right when the pandemic started. So we've had these interactions with public health units throughout. And Steve, it's been really a spectrum. There's been some public health units that have been extremely supportive of this and progressive and have looked at the data and said, we're going to use it for what it's worth and just use it as a complementary tool to all the other information we've had. While other public health units, and understandably so, have looked at the data and said, well, there's no real provincial guidelines, there's no real kind of script for us to follow in terms of how to really interpret this data, and that's completely understandable. So you see a spectrum across the province, and possibly at this point, we alluded to this and talked about it, without the real kind of same critical mass of clinical data that we're able to see. I think the wastewater now is being more and more positioned as an important metric for us to really understand what's happening in our communities.
Claire, let me ask you about that. Robert says it's understandable that some public health units want to sort of be stingy with that information, but do you think it's understandable that they're not as open as they perhaps could be or should be?
I think that, wastewater surveillance data is, it's tricky data to work with. It can be variable from day to day, and that's just, I think, the nature of how the samples are collected in the analyses. And I think that, like Dr. Della Tolla alluded to, like very close relationships and communications between the research teams that are doing the analysis and the public health units is critical for interpreting the data and to see through some of that variability. Well, so I can understand if those relationships don't get formed early on, then there could maybe be some trouble, fully using the data for a specific public health unit. But in our experience in the city of Toronto, we've had like an excellent relationship with Toronto Public Health, and we really work with them as a cohesive unit to interpret the data that our lab is putting out.
Why do you think they've chosen to be particularly forthcoming when others have not been?
I think that they see the value in the data. They see the value of it as a complementary tool. In the city of Toronto in particular, and the data that's come out of our lab, we sample a lot of facilities as well, such as long-term care homes and homeless shelters. And I know that they've found that data very valuable. We've been able to catch outbreaks just before the clinical testing did. So, the value at that scale became very clear to the public health unit early on.
Gustavo, let me follow up with you in this regard. More and more businesses across Ontario are now opening up, of course, and I wonder whether you are concerned that those businesses that do reopen more, with the potential for more information coming from them, will that somehow skew the data across the province? What's your view on that?
Well, you remember that this is a statistical problem at the end. I think we can modify our parameters in order to take in account this new situation.
And Claire, are there other sort of tricky things that you've got to be watching for as we sort of reopen the province more and more day by day?
Well, I think that maybe what your question alludes to is the fact that people are becoming more and more mobile, and their contribution to the wastewater samples that we're collecting may be coming from different places. And so that might be something that we need to take into consideration if we're trying to assign a certain level or trend to a specific area. And there is mobility data that you can use to understand how mobile a certain population that you're sampling is, and whether or not there's potential that they're contributing to the sample outside of their home area.
Got it. Robert, is it expensive to do this?
When you're comparing the cost associated with wastewater surveillance versus, clinically testing like we did throughout the pandemic, a large number of people in a population base, it's really, really not. I think that's one of the benefits of wastewater surveillance. And an example is Ottawa's 1 million people. Throughout the pandemic, 500 to 4,000 people were tested daily here in order to understand prevalence and incidence of the disease. We collected one wastewater sample every day. And not to say that the metrics were equivalent, prevalent, but that wastewater sample also gave us an indication of whether, there was spread, transmissibility within the province. So cost effectiveness, the economic aspect is a benefit of wastewater surveillance.
All right. Gustavo, how about using wastewater? I mean, obviously, for many people, this is the first time we're hearing about it as an option for studying the state of affairs related to COVID-19. Has it been used in the past with previous viruses?
Well, yes, it was used very successfully with polio in the 60s and the 70s. It was, in different countries, it has been used, extensively before. And one of the reasons, because it was particularly ready to be used with this COVID-19, is because these previous experiences.
Previous experiences that you say go back as much as 50 years? Is that right? Did I hear right?
Yes.
Huh, okay. So Claire, when we had, for example, SARS, which was, I guess, back in 2003, do you know whether there was any investigation of wastewater there to see how prevalent it was in the population?
Yes, I believe there was.
There was?
Yeah, there was a collaboration between universities and the city to look for SARS and wastewater.
What more do you need, Claire, in order to, I guess, build up some real, not expertise, no, testing infrastructure, I guess is what I'm looking for, because obviously we've got SARS today, but I think we all know now that this is not going to be the last pandemic that we deal with in our lifetime. So what does the future look like?
Yeah, so I mean, right now, the Provincial Wastewater Surveillance Initiative, it's mainly university labs across the province are doing the analysis. And, my understanding is that there's interest in integrating private laboratories into the program. And this is really to allow the research labs to pivot back to research. And there's a lot of interest in doing research on surveillance development. So this is something I think that would be, smart for the province to do, is just to bring in more capacity for this type of analysis. I think there's actually even examples internationally of municipalities who've integrated the wastewater testing for SARS-CoV-2 into their compliance sampling. So the municipalities actually develop in-house expertise to do this. So that's maybe something that could be considered. And yeah, I think beyond, future pandemics, I think there's even interest in using wastewater surveillance to track more common diseases like influenza, where we don't have great clinical data.
Robert, what would you like to see happen?
Yeah, just picking up on that exactly. So, like now that we built a lot of knowledge throughout the pandemic. So if you're looking at a pandemic and say there can be some silver linings, knowledge accumulation and building of that knowledge maybe is one of them. And in the wastewater surveillance field, that knowledge really was built throughout the pandemic, and now expanding that and everything we learned into, like Claire was saying, into influenza, into respiratory viruses, into other sort of disease targets. Also, we've seen through this initiative here in Ontario, and Gustavo, is working in the north, but even in terms of remote communities and Indigenous communities, we've seen the benefits of this technology. So there's a lot of potential here, and there's a lot of infrastructure that's been built up through this initiative, and hopefully we could keep going with it.
We've got about a minute and a half to go here. And Claire, I'm going to ask you a bit of a quirky question here, which is, why does someone want to go into this line of work?
Well, I mean, I can only share my own experience. I'm a hydrologist by training. I don't study wastewater. And this was just started as a side project. A group of researchers at the Urban Water Research Center at Ryerson got into, and it just it ballooned from there. And it's actually kind of interesting once you start learning about wastewater systems and sewers. It's you find out they're pretty fascinating. It's a secret kind of hidden world that a lot of us don't know about, but I think it can provide us a lot of information if we pay attention to it.
Clearly. Okay, in my last 30 seconds, Gustavo, I'm going to ask you a quirky question, and that is, I want to ask you about your wife. Who was your wife's grandfather?
Oh, Charles Best, as many of you know, he was part of the discovery of the insulin.
Everybody knows Banting and Best, and your wife's grandfather was Charlie Best. How about that?
Yeah.
2 degrees of separation from scientific magnificence. There you go. I just wanted to get that on the record as well. Very good. Claire, Gustavo, Robert, Great of all three of you to join us here on TVO tonight. We're grateful for your time.
Thank you
very much.
Thanks so much.
Apparently, there was a decade when people had the internet but didn't really know how to use it. And supposedly in that same decade, most people watched sitcoms on television in prime time because that was the only time to see them. Writer Chuck Klosterman details this strange bygone era in his latest offering. It's called The 90s, a book. And he joins us now from Portland, Oregon for more. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
All right, so we're seeing references to the 90s in movies like Captain Marvel and TV shows like Yellow Jackets and Pam and Tommy. Why do the 90s appear to be having a moment right now in pop culture?
Well, that's a very interesting question because typically interest in the recent past tends to go in these 20-year increments. Like in the United States in the 1970s, there was a high interest in the 1950s, like with Happy Days and American Graffiti and Laverne and Shirley and Grease. In the 80s, there was a intense sort of rediscovery of the 60s through like the Big Chill, Family Ties, this idea that sort of maybe this revolution that they had believed had happened had failed and they had to sort of reconcile that. In the 1990s, there was interest in the 70s. Musically, with like the rediscovery of classic rock, the movie Dazed and Confused, the most obvious example being That 70s Show. So it seems as though this obsession with the 90s should have really happened more in the previous decade, or maybe, just our recent past. But it seems as though now we're almost in this period of a perpetual now, where the 90s don't just seem like the last decade of the 20th century, but maybe the last decade that will be framed the way that we traditionally think of the framework of decades. And this interest in the 90s might be last a little longer. It won't be as much the trend, but more so a thing that seems real connected to what's happening now, even though some of the events feel weirdly distant.
We're going to get into the pop culture, politics, and technology of that era, but I'm curious, what interested you in writing a book about the 90s in the first place?
Well, I had a book come out almost 20 years ago called Sex, Drugs, and Cocoa Puffs that was a very personal collection of essays. So it was sort of how the 90s meant to me as a person. Like, it was things that I was interested in, things that I experienced, and that was sort of the main criteria. I'm a little older now, and I kind of wanted to do a book again about this period, but I wanted to do it sort of with a little bit more objectivity and a little more detachment. I probably wasn't ready to write this kind of book when I was 28 or whatever, 29. So I thought, well, now maybe I'm finally at a point where I can do a book where I can attempt something that was certainly more complicated than the other 11 books I had done, which were just sort of extensions of myself.
Now, before we delve into sort of the topics you talk about, I kind of want to make sure we get an idea of when the 90s officially began. Because for some people, that's January 1st, 1990. It ends December 31st, 1999. You think a little differently. When exactly did the 90s officially begin and end?
Well, I mean, officially, your description is right. If we only go by calendars, but culture and time doesn't really use the calendar. Nobody rips, the December off their calendar and it's like, well, my life is different now. I'm a different person. Like, it tends to be the texture of the period. Now, the kind of conventional take has become that the 90s really begin when the Berlin Wall falls in late '89. And then it ends at 9/11, and that this is sort of the way we sort of understand this period of time. I just alter that slightly. I do use 9/11 as the endpoint, but my sense is that after the Berlin Wall fell, well, there were big global implications. At least in North America, the year 1990 was pretty much just an extension of the 80s. A lot of the things that we associate with 80s culture were still central to the life, the day-to-day life of a person in the year 1990. I start the 90s with the release of Nirvana's Nevermind in fall of 1991, because that to me is when the texture and the caricature, maybe the cliche idea we have of the 90s really starts. The things that we associate with that time period sort of emerge from the shift in the popular culture that happened when this idea of sort of what grunge in general, but specifically Kurt Cobain and Nirvana, wanted to represent. Not necessarily what they did represent, but what their desire to represent was, which was this idea of what had once been seen as the counterculture now becoming the mainstream culture. That the biggest band in the world, or perhaps like the biggest film in terms of critical interest, what was happening in television, what was happening in politics and sports, things that had once been sort of seen as an element of the kind of the underground was now kind of pushed to the front, and that kind of created this, I don't know, this dissonance between how somebody who experienced that culture is supposed to feel about something that they had once sort of viewed as an extension of their alienation, but now was actually what everybody liked. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about grunge music. A lot of people associate, obviously, the 90s with that scene. How influential was that scene to pulp culture? You talk about Nirvana and Nevermind in 1991 as well.
Well, as a musical culture, it was to a degree derivative. It was very much like a lot of what had happened in the middle part of the 1970s, sort of updated through kind of the idea of a lot of like punk ideologies from the 80s. But in a non-musical sense, it was extremely significant. It had this sort of rippling effect through culture where a belief came that if you wanted to understand what a young person thought like or felt like or what they wanted from any kind of product, musical or otherwise, you had to understand like someone like what did Kurt Cobain seem to want? What were his values? There was this idea that a lot of the things about rock music in particular that had always been desirable and really central to the youth experience were now a little bit embarrassing. I mean, the grunge bands, as huge as they were, always felt almost oppressed by the fame that they had achieved and in many cases pursued. And this is where you start seeing these things that we really associate with, in some ways like the baseline of if you were making a situation comedy about the 90s, what would you want the characters to think and feel like? A lot of these things would come out of this idea that success, and particularly like a commercial kind of success, was an embarrassment and something that you wanted to distance yourself from. There's a section in this book where I discuss how if you talk to a young person today, say somebody who's really politically engaged and pretty intelligent young person, and say, what is the biggest problem in North America? They would likely say capitalism. Whereas if you had found that same kind of person in 1995, they would have much more likely said commercialism. It wasn't that the idea of the structure was the problem. It was how things were packaged within it. There was this belief that things did have merit, but we damaged that by trying to sell it in a way that didn't sort of have an organic appeal to its audience. And these are things that you can really connect to the grunge movement.
Now, grunge and hip-hop music were sort of ascending around the same time, but grunge didn't seem to last too much, or not past 1999. What happened there?
Well, I mean, what you're seeing in there is that it was the ascension of hip hop is in some ways the musical story of the 90s in terms of if we're looking at it through the lens of right now. If we're looking at what was influential about the culture we're currently in, it was sort of this idea that hip hop had moved from this sort of fringe thing to kind of incrementally become like the dominant form of youth music. What you see with grunge is the recession of rock from the center of culture. I think some people assume that when I say that, what I'm saying is like rock music is over or it's dead or whatever. That's not what I'm arguing. As a genre, it will always exist in the same way jazz will always exist. But what we see with grunge is sort of what happened at the end of the jazz period, where this thing that was once the center of the culture sort of became this thing that was ancillary. And with grunge music, what you see are these artists who were incredibly self-aware about the meaning of what they were doing. They had looked at bands from the 80s, say some of those like hair metal bands on the Sunset Strip, or even the indie rock scene from that period, sort of the MTVing of music culture. And they saw that as something that was probably detrimental to them as artists. And they injected that into their art. And it was this self-awareness, this understanding of what grunge was while it was happening, that sort of robbed it of its power over time. And, with all art, what seems to happen is a high degree of self-awareness by the performer is what ultimately sort of makes it less meaningful to the consumer.
All right, I want to talk about Generation X. This was a generation that came of age during the 90s. What was so distinct about this generation?
Well, the generational question is always tough, because if you look at Generation Z or millennials, or Gen X people, even, almost any young demographic, something that is sort of emerging and is new, and there's an understanding that there's a new kind of person in their 20s. Many of the qualities are kind of applied to all of these groups because they're really just applied to young adults. This idea that maybe they have less interest in making money, or they have less interest in home ownership. Maybe they're more skeptical about relationships. They're trying to detach from whatever was the previous dominant generation. And all these things were true about Generation X. What is interesting about this generation, though, is that when these qualities were applied, it seemed to be happening really in the present tense, that it wasn't something that we were retroactively looking at and saying, okay, this is what this period meant. People who were, in their 20s, in their early 30s, in the 90s, were sort of given these messages while they were supposedly experiencing these events. And the thing that is probably most significant is they oddly accepted these ideas. I mean, the normal inclination when someone tells you you're like this because you were born in this year is to push back against it.
Right.
To say like, well, how can that be? It's like astrology. Just because I happen to be born in the early 1970s doesn't mean I'm this specific kind of adult in the 90s. But with Generation X, there tended to be a willingness to be like, well, okay, fine. And this was seen sort of as like an apathetic, almost validation of the idea. That they would say a Gen X person was uninterested and apathetic to the world at large, and then they would say like, well, okay, well, you can say that about us, that's fine. It seemed to prove the assumption. A lot of the things about Generation X did end up becoming true simply because the demographic itself didn't disagree with it.
Very interesting. I want to actually segue to this concept that you talk about called, selling out, because you write a lot about it, and the concept of selling out and the degree to which that notion altered the meaning and perception of almost everything is the single most 90s aspect of the 90s. What did it mean to sell out?
Well, okay, so you look at entertainment in the 1980s, or just culture at large in the 1980s. There was a real reward for the aspirant person. The idea sort of was like, this is a time when you can become as big as you have the potential to be. And so it was the idea of selling out in the 80s had been this thing. It's like, well, you're kind of just doing what everyone is doing. It's very similar to how it is now. If you try to talk to a young person and describe what selling out means, it's confusing. It doesn't make any sense. It seems like you're almost saying this idea that you're not supposed to try to succeed. It seems completely antithetical to any kind of commercial enterprise. But in the 90s, this idea of selling out really peaked. The idea had been around for a long time, but we reached this point where it wasn't just the idea that what you were doing was an attempt, or like kind of a craven attempt to make money. It had to do with the desire to be liked by people who weren't like you. And this was very discomforting to a certain kind of artist because it seemed to damage the integrity of what you were doing. The 90s had this relationship with integrity and authenticity that was very complicated for people who were trying to do anything interesting during that time. I mean, because it was essentially saying this idea that you understand to be ludicrous, because you also had to understand it was kind of ridiculous to try to be, any kind of public figure and have no success. But you also had to accept the idea that sort of playing your cards too openly, or showing this kind of desire to get attention and be loved was kind of a pathetic impulse. There were a lot of ideologies from punk music that had come through in a lot of different ways. Independent film was like this to a degree. That if you, the idea was to make a film that completely sort of, projected the idea of the filmmaker onto the screen, almost as if the idea of the audience was secondary.
Well, let's actually talk about that. So we actually have a clip of Reality Bites. Obviously, a romantic comedy came out in 1994. We got Ethan Hawke, Winona Ryder. For those who haven't seen it, this clip, a little bit of a content warning. The scene contains some strong language, so let's roll that.
What is it that you want from me, huh? What is it? You want me to get a job on the line for the next 20 years? Until I'm granted leave with my gold-plated watch and my balls full of tumors because I surrendered the one thing that means shit to me? Well, honey, you can just exhale because it's not going to happen, not in this lifetime.
All right, fine. You don't want to work, fine. Don't
Lady!
You want to be in a band, then be in a goddamn band. Rehearse every day, play 3 times a night. Don't just dick around in the same coffee house for 5 years. Don't dick around with her or with me. I mean, try something for once in your life. Do something about it, but you know what? You better do it now, and you better do it fast, because the world doesn't owe you any favors. And whether you know it or not, you're on the inside track to Loserville, USA. Just like him.
Passionate scene there. What does the film say about Generation X and the idea of selling out?
Yeah, I write a lot about Reality Bites, and I have in the past, and it's not because of its cinematic value as much as sort of its kind of its ideological value. For people who have no relationship to this film, it's centered around a love triangle, the way many films from this period are if they're romantic comedies. You have the Winona Ryder character, and she has sort of 2 guys who are pursuing her. One is the Ethan Hawke character, which we see in there. He's almost like the platonic ideal of what slacker culture was. He's just completely encapsulates almost every sort of broad generalization about what a certain kind of guy was like during that period. The other guy who pursues her, who's not in that clip, but directed the film, was Ben Stiller, who plays this person from essentially a kind of a fake version of Much Music or MTV, who's like trying to convince Winona Ryder to take her documentary film and make it into this more commercial product. Now, the reason this is interesting is because at the end of the film, she ends up going with Ethan Hawke, even though he treats her pretty poorly, is sort of a bad boyfriend in almost every possible way, whereas Ben Stiller just wanted to help her and sort of support her, but he was a conscious sellout. The Ben Stiller character was somebody who looked at entertainment as a way to sort of make money and achieve success, whereas the Ethan Hawke character sort of represents the opposite. Now, when this film came out and she ends up, choosing who she chooses, you would see a lot of reactions from older critics at the time that, like, well, Winona Ryder picked the wrong person. She picked the guy who's a jerk, but he's the authentic jerk, as opposed to sort of the compromised individual who actually cared about her. Now, when I saw that film as a senior in college, me and all my friends assumed that perception just showed the difference between an older person and a younger person. A younger person saw this relationship as romantic and intense. An older person saw it as doomed. But what time has sort of shown is that when new generations experience this film, they sort of share the opinion of what had been, I guess, for lack of a better term, the baby boomer idea. They were like, why would she end up with this guy who's doesn't seem to care about her, who seems more interested in himself than her? As it turns out, the strangeness of this relationship is not connected to the difference between like youth and age. It was just that period. Only in the middle 90s did the idea of being with an authentic jerk seem more desirable than somebody who was likable, but willing to sort of give up who he was, compromise his identity for these other things. And this is why you watch that film now, and you might not think it's great entertainment, but it's incredibly telling because it happened at the time. It isn't something where we went back and we tried to make a movie to explain this. This is a movie that explains the middle 90s as it was occurring. And that's very rare for a period piece to sort of have that degree of self-awareness. Yeah.
Very interesting. I want to shift gears a little bit. I want to ask you about the internet. It was a big thing. Well, maybe not back then, but I'm curious, people probably didn't know how basic the internet was back then. How did people at the time view it?
Well, so we all understand that the internet essentially does have its foundation in the 90s. And in fact, it's very easy to imagine, say, a time 50 years from now when people think of the 90s and the only thing they really think about is the inception of the internet. But the internet was completely different during this period, which is something that we've almost collectively forgot. The internet kind of overwrites itself. So the things that we think about the internet are really, for the most part, if you asked any of your viewers, like, what's good and bad about the internet, they would give this whole list, and we would almost, even though we might disagree on certain points, generally that list would be pretty static. But they would all be extensions of social media, which didn't exist in the 90s. Those are 2000s concepts, the 21st century concepts. The idea of the internet in the 90s was almost like this unknown potentiality. I mean, we think of this period as having a real kind of sort of cynical, sort of underwhelmed view, but that wasn't true in the insular world of the internet, where it was believed that it could kind of transform anything. And so our understanding of what the internet was in practical terms in the 90s tends to be inaccurate. We think of the 90s almost operating in an internet way the way it did now. It was just the mechanics of it. We were like building the blocks of this. So when you think about what the internet meant to the 90s, what you're seeing is something that actually affected culture less than it seems in retrospect, despite being almost certainly the most important thing that came out of this time.
I want to talk about the impact that the internet had on the music industry. I remember in the early 2000s, I'm sitting at my desktop downloading stuff off LimeWire. Obviously, in 1999, we have Napster. How did it reinvent the music industry?
Well, the music industry is a very easy way to understand how things like the internet affect things that have seemingly no relationship or no natural relationship to network computing. Okay, so like, things like Napster, that was just a mechanism for listening to music. It had no impact on the creation of music, the direction of music, but it really changed people's relationship to the value of music. I mean, when you look through, say, World War II up until, the late 90s, music forced kind of physical subcultures to exist simply because of scarcity. Like, very few people had the ability, especially if they were young, to buy every record they want or every cassette they want. So they ended up buying things that sort of tied them to a sect of culture. They would say, I like Rush, so I'm going to buy Triumph. And it's pretty soon they build this sort of collection of music that has some kind of ideological similarities. You saw this with goth culture. You see this with dance culture. Then we get to this time when songs now are free and unlimited. So the person who once maybe could only have 15 cassettes in their whole collection could now have 15,000 songs on their hard drive. That gave them a lot more agency, right? It would seem as though that was better. But the thing that it shifted was the idea that this music had sort of its own separate value. It'd be the idea, I draw a similarity to, like, counterfeiting money. If you counterfeit a bunch of money, it doesn't give you more money. It incrementally changes the value of all the other currency. And that's sort of what this easy access to music did. It changed the way people thought about music. It didn't make people like music less, but it made it seem less tied to themselves because we removed that sort of physical object that for a lot of people was the non-musical importance. The idea that they were had a relationship to something that really reflected who they were. That if you went into their house and you looked at their record collection, you could get a sense of what this person was like, maybe. Might not be totally accurate, but you could have a vague idea of what they were like. You can't really do that by looking at someone's download history because it's all free. And it means that they're sort of picking things arbitrarily. I mean, you don't want to think about music purely as a commodity, but the commodification of music did sort of create a lot of its meaning, and that was destroyed by the internet.
All right, I want to shift gears and talk politics, and I want to specifically talk about the man who came from a place called Hope. I'm talking obviously about Bill Clinton here. You somehow tied in Bill Clinton and his time at the White House with the movie American Beauty, which came out in 1999. In what ways are these two things related?
Well, so at least in the United States, I mean, Clinton is the defining character of the 90s. I mean, in some ways, I guess Kurt Cobain is the image that we may immediately imagine. But because Clinton was president for 8 of the 10 years, if we're using the calendar, and had such sort of a sweeping effect on not just politics, but sort of the way young people came to understand politics. He's this incredibly important figure whose legacy now has strangely almost been a little bit deteriorated by the way culture has changed over time, which is not how it usually happens for people who leave office. Their reputation tends to rise. His has not. The reason I compare it to American Beauty is because this was a film that came out in 1999, was commercially successful, dominated the Oscars, dominated almost all the awards, was seen sort of as this film that was addressing these kind of existential problems that were happening in the suburban United States and suburban Canada and probably Europe as well, where there was this idea that maybe people had achieved the things that they desired to achieve, and yet found them sort of unsatisfying and unfulfilling. What has changed is that the reputation of that movie is now terrible. I mean, it's like it is actually seen not as just a movie that maybe wasn't as good as we thought, but problematic and sort of an extension of privilege. And that all the problems that Kevin Spacey, the main character in that film, has are actually things that a modern person almost can't even relate to. He gives up this great job at a magazine to work in a fast food restaurant, to sit in his garage and smoke pot all day, and has this weird relationship with his wife and is interested in his daughter's friendship, a friend of hers. All of these things seem like the problems of people who would have supported Bill Clinton in a way. And at least in the United States, the idea that those problems can be taken seriously is kind of over. You see a movie like American Beauty, and you see people struggling with issues that no longer warrant the classification as issues. And you show, and it was interesting because Clinton liked this movie. Like Clinton gave an interview to Roger Ebert and talked about why he liked American Beauty, and it makes so much sense when we think about that in retrospect. And yet both have sort of suffered the same fate. That the culture changed and it completely obliterated all the things that we originally liked about these identities when they came out. Like the things people praised American Beauty for and the things that Bill Clinton was praised for at the time are the exact same things now used to sort of mitigate their importance.
Chuck, I really appreciate you taking the time. Really great stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that is the agenda for Tuesday, April 5th, 2022. The handling of the convoy in Ottawa earlier this year raised some big questions about policing in this province, and we're going to examine those tomorrow. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.